We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
We really appreciate Ajay and his coming tonight and look forward to his talk. So that's Ajay.
Thanks Dave, thanks Tom. It's really good to be here. Thank you for that warm welcome. I have a lot of ground to cover today. I have a lot of stuff prepared, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. Just like Scrumban is very simple on its surface, but its modular nature allows for quite a bit of plugins. The title of the talk is called Scrumban and A3 Thinking Demystified. And as I will endeavor to show you, A3 thinking can be seen as just another modular plugin into Scrumban. So there's a whole lot of gobbledygook, but I'm going to try to help make sense of it. Okay. So what's Scrumban and Scrumban or not? I'm sure many of you must have seen this Dilbert comic. And many of you may know some of those pointy-head bosses. Worse still, some of you may be some of those pointy-head bosses. What I will demonstrate to you, hopefully, is that Scrumban is not going to give you capability where there is no capability. Scrum doesn't do that, neither does Scrumban. So if you're coming for that, you're in the wrong room. This is what we're going to try and cover. Why and what Scrumban is. And I'm going to show you a case study. This is basically actually a conglomeration of a few different case studies developed into this one amalgamation of a fictitious bank. So the stories behind it are true, the names have all been redacted and that's okay. So, and then we'll, hopefully if we have time, we'll look at some Scrumban measurements as well. Okay. Is that why you guys are here? Okay, good. The first section, why and what Scrumban. Version 1 recently put out this report. Any of you seen the State of Agile report that came out recently? It's a good report to go through. It doesn't give a whole lot of depth into who they've polled or surveyed, but what it does shed light into is how popular Scrum is. Out of the people who responded to the survey, 55% of them use Scrum. And what's really interesting to me is this long tail. And if you look at year-over-year data, Scrumban's been on the rise. It's become one of the more popular hybrid techniques. Scrum is no doubt one of the most successful commercial process frameworks out there. And there's a reason for its popularity. It's simple. It fills what the Agile Manifesto expresses, which is incremental delivery of value, customer focus, team orientation, scheduling, continuous improvement, things that we care about, right? This Agile Manifesto rightly does not give you the how. Scrum, Crystal, XP, frameworks like that have filled in that gap. However, Ken Schwaber says this about Scrum. And Ken Schwaber, by the way, is one of the co-creators of Scrum along with Jeff Sutherland. Right? So he says 75% of organizations using Scrum will not succeed in getting the benefits that they hope for from it. That's a pretty startling statement to me. From the co-creator of the framework, a pretty open admission. He goes on to say, however, Scrum is a very simple framework with which the game of complex product development is played. Scrum exposes every inadequacy or dysfunction within an organization's product and system development practices. The intention of Scrum is to make them transparent so the organization can fix them. Unfortunately, many organizations change Scrum to accommodate the inadequacies or dysfunctions instead of solving Scrum, instead of solving them. So when an organization is faced with what Scrum is exposing, they're changing the process instead of changing themselves. That's what he's essentially saying. And he's also claiming that Scrum exposes all inadequacies. I might disagree on that, but it does expose quite a bit of inadequacies. And so what I believe Scrumban does is fill that important void. So here's my argument to why Scrumban fills and adds to Scrum's capability. And it gives you different dimensions that Scrum does not naturally offer. So one, it addresses this variability in work. Now, we're all in the knowledge work industry, and we understand knowledge work is inherently variable, right? So it's non-routine, unpredictable, some more than others, of course. In operations, they are more predictable, and in research, it's less predictable. Because of that variability, you need to address that from a process standpoint. And any cookie-cutter process framework, even though some may disagree that Scrum is not that, and I would agree with them to a certain extent, from a process standpoint, you need to address that variability. Another reason why I believe Scrumban adds value is that it improves predictability. Kind of goes along with the first one. Another reason is that it imposes no prescribed destination process. So it does not give you, this is how you ought to do it in Scrumban. What it does is it gives basically a certain set of guidelines for you to evolve, continuously evolve, and we'll see that so it defines a starting point, which is Scrum, and then, but defines no end point in terms of process. It also gives a more natural contagious mechanism. For anything to scale, there needs to be engagement from within. And Scrumban, because of the Kanban method's engagement or the sustainability agenda, gives Scrum that capability. And the other aspect is can germinate from anywhere within the organization. Now, any of you are theory of constraints folks, TOC? The whole. So for TOC to be successful, there's a very important thing that needs to happen. TOC has to come top down. The goal, if you read the book, The Goal, there was buy-in from the top down. For Kanban to be successful, it doesn't make any such requirement from those who implement it. And because of that top-down, middle-out, or bottom-up approach, it gives sustainability that much more of an edge. Lastly, the product organization, it cares about the business side of things, the market side of things, the strategy side of things of an organization, and it really addresses that. So that's why I believe Scrumban is I've still not defined what Scrumban is, I know. So this is actually from the book. The book speaks about this case study in this fictitious bank called Mammoth Bank. Mammoth Bank is a large national bank headquartered somewhere in the US. And an important thing is that they have a very, very large IT organization, 10,000 persons strong, including several offshore teams and so on. So we're going to talk about these concepts, the Scrumban concepts, in the context of this fictional case study. Okay? This organization has also gone through several transformations, 3 Agile transformations. In 2013, there were some very specific difficulties they faced. For them, disruptive change was not working. So when teams were made to adopt Scrum, they were just resisting that because of the way they were doing things before, either because of the type of the work they did, or because of the organizational impediments, or there was a plethora of reasons. And for them, disruptive change, this is what you were doing, and now this is what you're going to do, was just not working. And in a lot of cases, premature success was declared. But from coaching, there was some benefits clearly present, but they were not happy with it. And there was reasons why the executives particularly were not happy. And part of the reason was this. This is an actual chart from that time period. The names are redacted. But what this is showing is this growth, this agile transformation, this maturity curve. I know some of you might be doing agile assessments I'm not a real good believer of these Agile assessments. I think they fall short in many cases. But this is an outcome of an Agile assessment. And what this is showing is that teams, on the x-axis, by the way, is initialization, practicing Agile, doing Agile, and being Agile with other teams. So just sort of, and each of these had certain categories that they would measure in. And on the y-axis is how much in those categories they were, they matured. And apparently, according to this graph, this extreme right corner team, Digital M, was extremely mature, and they were practicing Agile really well with other teams. But when you asked their business customers, you would get a totally different picture. They were not delivering what was effectively useful and profitable from a business standpoint. And so, from a customer standpoint, it wasn't being Agile in that sense. So there was a disconnect between what the business and the market and the economics that some of us talk about. That disconnect was present. And also, from an internal standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, there was just a lot of dissatisfaction within the team. So the way they were measuring probably could have been better, but what they were measuring also lacked some important factors. So the bank's specific problem areas were productivity, predictability, politics, profitability, permanence. They were plasticized, and I'll explain this in a second, and prematurity. So I'll speak to one of them particularly. So what I mean by plasticized is because of these generations of transformations, Agile transformation. They had one in 2001, 2002 timeframe, 2007, 2008 timeframe, and then again in 2012 and 13 timeframe. So in that time, because of these transformations and those people who survived all that, when you are helping an organization grow and when you want an organization to improve, you want a certain elasticity within an organization. You want some resistance. You want them to learn and respond to that. But if they're just doing like automatons, now we're doing this and now we're going to be doing this, that essentially is what I call plastic, right? They've lost that elastic property. So within the organization, you would see a lot of these properties. And of course, others are self-explanatory. The bank's goals, well, greater agility, dependability, productivity, of course, high quality, better alignment, greater customer satisfaction, greater market share, and sustainable profitability. The last three particularly are business concerns, right? And so the merging of system level things like predictability and productivity and with business goals is starting to, is what's being depicted here. So we saw Scrum's popularity, we saw why Scrumban. We also saw the bank's problem areas, we saw bank's goals. Now I want to define what Scrumban is. Okay? So I have two definitions for it. This is the simpler definition and a very basic definition, and one that comes across very frequently. Scrumban is the Kanban method applied to Scrum as a starting and underlying process framework. So Scrum is the starting and underlying process framework, and when you apply Kanban method to Scrum, that's when you get Scrumban. Okay? So that's the simple definition. Now, the reason why we can apply the Kanban method to Scrum is because Kanban method is a change method. And Kanban method is very simple. If you've seen the Kanban method, this is basically the 4 principles and 6 practices that you can look up anywhere. But it essentially is helping, it can be applied to anything. It can be applied to RUP, it can be applied to Waterfall, XP, Crystal, Safe. It can be applied as Scrum as well. And when you apply to Scrum, that's when you get Scrumban. The one thing that I would like to point out here in all the practices, and probably one of the key property, which is what we're going to focus on a lot, is the last one, the last practice, which is improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally using models and the scientific method. So the Kanban method is is ambiguous in this sense, in that it leaves this open area where you can plug in models, right? So think of it this way. If Scrum is the car, right, and the Kanban method is sort of this turbo booster capability mechanism that you add on to the car, the models that you would plug in, so that the nitro fuel, if you will, and this is the way I explained to my 6-year-old, so, and he understood it. So the nitro fuels are these models, and we'll look at many of these models, but Scrumban is essentially that. So with that, I'm going to go into a much more elaborate definition. So Scrumban is a pragmatic and entrepreneurial application of the Kanban method to Scrum, often resulting in continuing evolution of Scrum-based systems into business value, service-oriented, agile, lean, and adaptive systems at a pace moderated by the thinking system. Now, Scrumban can be really simple, but it can be really complicated as well. So, and you can make it as complicated as you'd like, but this one is sort of trying to be comprehensive in its definition. And what I want to particularly focus on is the sustainability agenda, the serviceability agenda that Kanban has. And that's what you're giving Scrum the capability of. Unfortunately, what's happening in the industry is these false definitions that are out there. So when you define Scrumban to be a process destination or a process framework in and of itself, that's when you get these false hybrids. And these common false hybrids are Scrum and Kanban, one of the false definitions. So when you have the Kanban as a process framework, and then Scrum, when you're practicing Scrum in it, that's when you get Scrum and Kanban. Another one, Kanban and Scrum. So when you apply flow within an iteration, right? So that's what they're alluding to over here. So Scrumban is not a process framework, and that's what I hope to demonstrate, or a process destination. Here's one, there's many false myths, and Frank Vega, I know, addressed, when he was here, must have addressed some of these things, but within the Kanban method, there's obviously flow that is being addressed, and Kanban has this idea of the two-phase commit. So you have the commitment point when work enters into the system, and you have the release point when you actually commit to release it to the customer. So if you look at the iteration, right, a time box iteration, a time box iteration can be seen as just as an instance of a synchronized two-phase commit. You don't have to, and when you have rhythms of it, regular rhythms of it, that's basically your iterations, right? So, but you don't have to synchronize it, and that's what Kanban suggests, is that it gives you that flexibility that if it's right for you, if that constraint is right for you, then so be it. But it gives you that flexibility not to have that synchronization. Okay? So that's just one of the many myths that I'd like to address. But going back to the definition, so Scrumban is a pragmatic and entrepreneurial application, because entrepreneurial, think business concerns. And last one is the pace moderated, think sustainability agenda. So how does Scrumban affect Scrum, right? Here are some of the examples. You can improve flow within an iteration. You can change the way you plan iterations. Your prioritization that the product owner typically does, that can change. Role definitions can change. MVP, minimum viable product and minimum marketable feature and release planning, that changes. Spikes, story points, budgeting. I mean, take your favorite Agile Scrum concept and you can help improve. So the first section was why and what Scrumban. Now we're going to go to the second section, which is Scrumban evolutions. So remember, Scrum is the process framework. Kanban method is giving you this capability to add modules, to plug in modules of different management frameworks, right? And we're going to look at how some of those models help improve Scrum, okay? We'll start with this, the old model of management. The way we work has changed. This was the way we used to work. Process coaches would define or design processes, and managers would assign workers to tasks, and the workers would do them. the managers would basically impose the process. In the new model, this is how it is. Managers and workers are essentially in the same group. They control and evolve policies. The distinction between them is in the level of risk decisions that they take, essentially. And process coaches are essentially facilitating and learning the system. So modern management is different. The group that we're going to look at is called the RAD group. The RAD group was particularly responsible for delivering a consumer-facing mobile application. There were 5 teams, 6 to 7 classic Scrum teams, and we're going to see how Scrumban, how they use Scrumban in their context. So Sam's team, classic Scrum. Everyone familiar with this, I'm sure. What they did as they got started was they identified their sources of dissatisfaction, which is their predictability was lacking, and they could improve the business effectiveness of their results, or what they delivered to the customer. And on the right, and you'll see this on the following slides as well, what you'll see is the modules that you can plug in to the Kanban method can be any number of management models, any number of theories. So this particular one, they chose to use some systems thinking, A3 thinking, and the long tail model of generating options. Okay, and we'll go through each one of those things specifically. So the book talks about this thing. It basically lays out a kickstart framework in the mobilized chapter. And then through this, you basically identify your source of dissatisfaction. You understand the way you work. You do demand and capability analysis and basic management. And Scrumban teams start with this. There were some concepts familiar to them, and there were some new concepts introduced to them. So let's take, for example, the class of service. Scrum teams had a set of priorities. They basically had this high, medium, and low priorities, but they introduced the concept of risk into their teams, which they didn't have before. So Scrum teams didn't have that. This was a new capability added on by Scrumban, and that was something we got started with. So this is how they work. As a Scrum team, this is classic Scrum, right? Product backlog, iteration commitment to doing, release, and done. And as they got started, there was clearly a recognition of understanding their demand and their capability. The first model that they applied, remember within Kanban, again, you can apply any model within the Scrumban definition. The first thing they chose to do was to look at it from a systems thinking standpoint. And to demonstrate systems thinking concept, I'm going to show you a video.
That's...
I brought you something to... No! Spit that out right now! I have got to teach you about food. Close your eyes. Now, take a bite of this. No! Don't just hork it down!
Too late.
Here. Chew it slowly. Only think about the taste. See?
Not really.
Creamy, salty, sweet, and oaky nuttiness. You detect that?
Oh, I'm detecting nuttiness.
Close your eyes. Now taste this. Whole different thing, right? Sweet, crisp, slight tang on the finish.
Okay.
Now, try them together.
Okay. I think I'm getting a little something there. It might be the nuttiness.
See?
Could be the tang.
That's it. Now, imagine every great taste in the world being combined into infinite combinations, tastes that no one has tried yet, discoveries to be made.
I think. You lost me again.
Yeah.
But that was interesting. Most interesting garbage I ever.
So it's one of my kids' favorite movies, and I was watching it the other day and thinking, how do I show systems thinking in emergent properties in a nutshell? And as I was watching this movie, I thought, that's it. Anyway, Ratatouille, the idea here is that, you're mixing strawberries and cheese and from it you have new and emergent properties, right? Well, if that's, and the two key things that he says is that he says infinite combinations, and then the other word he uses is discover, right? So if a simple thing like cheese, and obviously he's exaggerating, can give you lots of combinations, or a food can give you lots of combinations. Now just think about it, applying that to knowledge systems, right? Think about the number of things that are going on in knowledge systems. In systems, right? They have functional interests, QA, dev, test, release. You have processes, you have work, there's lots of things that are variable. There are lots of things that are changing. There are lots of things that are dynamic, right? And so systems thinking is this idea of trying to understand this, to get a holistic understanding of the emergent attributes and behavior of the collective, right? So when you're looking at teams practicing Scrum, for example, and they're responsible for delivery of a certain thing, looking at it holistically, looking at it systemically, helps you to understand the individual relationships, the dependencies within. And these are some characteristics that systems have that give you an understanding of what's happening within systems. So when you try to, like, just take, for example, amplifying or dampening effects, right? So Agile, in this particular example, where in the bank there were Agile transformations for 3 generations, they obviously did a ton. They engaged a lot of different people, but the effect that they finally got was very little. So that's a dampening effect. Similarly, maybe you employ test-driven development in your organization. With small changes in test-driven developments, and perhaps introducing ATTD or some things like that, you can have profound effects in the quality improvements of your product, right? So that might be what you call an amplifying effect. So there's understanding the cause and effect and the cascading effects of different things within a system is very important, and having that shared understanding. So Sam's team is starting to develop that systems thinking, right? And one of the things that when they started trying to gain that systems thinking mindset, that's what helps them to see themselves as a service unit and see who the customers are, what kind of work was being given to them, what is the rate of arrival of the work, what is the nature of the work, what do they do to get it done, who their customers are, how does work come in, where does work go. So that's a systems thinking mindset. And when you do that, one of the first things that they discovered is, okay, these are the things that we do to work, which is we do some analysis work, we do some development, we do some testing, we do some, and then we get it ready for deployment, right? So they are, and it's important to note that and when you see Kanban boards, typically, what people tend to depict is just sort of handoffs. And that's a poor way of looking at Kanban boards. What you really want to understand is what information is getting discovered, or what value is being added, right? So they're developing that initial systems thinking mindset. So at the bottom right corner, you see that on systems thinking, they got one clip. So taking a step back, remember I told you that you can plug in multiple models into the Kanban framework, because Kanban is a change method which can be applied to Scrum, right? The first model we applied was systems thinking model, right? Now the second model we're going to apply is the A3 thinking. The A3 problem solving method comes from Toyota, from the continuous improvement culture at Toyota. The idea is to enable and improve adaptability in your businesses and processes in your business environment. And what's a really good example is the Toyota's quality circles. Anyone read the book, The Toyota Way or The Toyota Kata? I highly recommend those 2 books. Those are very, very good books. But in the book, they describe this, what is called the Toyota quality circle. And what these were essentially these ad hoc groups that would come into Vogue, completely optional, they were collaborative, and they would come into picture to solve a particular problem. They had a shared method, which was the A3 thinking method, the A3 problem solving method, which we'll describe in a minute. And they had an empirical mindset. And the A3 is basically an outcome of, or an instance of the PDCA approach. PDCA, of course, from Deming, the plan, do, check, and act. And it's, it has those characteristics of the statement. They applied A3 in the context of using the Kinefin framework. Okay, so this is one more model that they applied. Right? And the Kinefin framework is a practical application of complexity theory to science of management. So we can use this thing to basically make sense of what's going on within the system, or what domain. So in this case, just as an example, in the complicated domain, you know that there's a cause to a problem, but you don't know what exactly the cause is. Okay? In the complex domain, you don't know what the problem is or what the cause is. You don't even know exactly if there is a cause even. Right? So what you do in the complex domain is you probe for information, you learn what's going on. So when A3 is applied in the context of Kinevin, it takes different forms. And what they were doing was applying A3 in both those forms, in the complicated and the complex. And the reason why this is particularly good is when we try to solve problems, we might have a certain bias to solving a problem a certain way. When you know what domain it is in, and again, this is a continuous spectrum, and some things can be complicated, more complicated and less complex, so it's not a binary way of looking at it, but nevertheless, it gives you an approach and a mindset to identify and make sense of what's going on in a domain so that you can have the right approach. So the A3 problem-solving method is actually, pretty simple. On the left-hand side of the paper is basically the plan side of things, and the right-hand side is the do, check, and act. The A3 comes literally from the A3 size sheet. So the idea is you want to capture what the problem is and what you're going to do about it in an A3 size sheet. And on the left-hand side, what you're doing is this pretty simple sections here: the background of the problem, the current condition and what's going on, the data, what your target condition is, the root cause analysis, or what you're going to do with what you've identified as the cause, and then countermeasures, and then confirmation of those countermeasures or the results of the tests or results of what you've done, and then follow-up actions. So those are the sections. So if you're applying A3 in a complicated domain, it would take that's the traditional way of doing things.
What does A3 stand for?
So A3 literally means the A3 size sheet. So the normal size is A4 when you print paper. A3 is a larger size sheet, and the idea is you want to capture the problem and the solution on that. And what it does is it forces you to synthesize and distill what your problem is. Right? So it's a problem-solving method and a problem-solving discipline. Right? So literally it means it's just an A3 size sheet. And what Toyota was doing is there was a culture of continuous improvement, and they used this problem-solving method to improve their systems. Okay? So in this example, any questions? Okay. In this example, the team was applying the A3 problem-solving method to the complex domain. In the complex domain, because there is no identified cause, you can't come to a root cause here, right? So in this section, typically, if you were applying in a traditional way, you would use the 5Y tool or the root cause analysis to come to a cause, not to analysis. When you're applying in a complex domain, you don't know what's going on. So what you're doing is you're exploring to understand what tests what hypothesis, what experimentation can we do to understand what's going on? And that's what they were doing. So in this example, the bank was losing $100,000 per day. All the examples, the data is all changed. So the lack of basic app is directly attributed to the bank losing $100,000 a day. And the adoption was very, very low because of the mobile app. And when they saw the data, they saw that their data was very, very low compared to industry standards, even their previous releases of applications. And their goal and target condition was identify factors of the low adoption rates. Okay? So they asked a series of questions here. Here's one, I'll just take one example, which is there a lack of awareness of the app among the beta group? No. The market division engaged in a structured campaign that began several months before the planned release date. Here's another question. Have non-adopting customers ever logged on and used the app? Yes. It was most downloaded and logged into the app when first offered. So they're asking a series of questions and to understand what's going on. And then they've come up with some countermeasures, which in this case is experiments because it's in the complex domain, right? And the experiments that they came up with is they were going to analyze activity logs, and the other one is they're going to push out, through the push notification functionality of the app, they're going to push out a survey. And in that they're going to see for patterns, they're looking for patterns, right? So in and through that, to make a long story short, what they study the data and they see through the notification, the survey, what they come to realize is that this was the Shell app, this was when the Shell app was released. The marketing campaign started soon after that and went on till this time, right? The login activity through the study of the server logs showed that there was enough study activity here, but the actual release of the beta, which was the most of the functionality, came in after that. So that the users did not give them another chance. The users didn't give them another chance. Problem-solving method sort of helped discover that information. So coming back to our case study, Sam's team is starting to own this discipline. They're starting to own this evolution, learning evolution. They're starting to own a discipline, own a kata in their day-to-day things, right? And that's a capability that's Scrumban, I mean the A3 problem-solving method under the larger model of the Kanban method is given them. The next thing, and of course there's other wins over here. You'll see that they've adopted buffer lanes. They've adopted the lean coffee model, which basically, if you just go to leancoffee.org, you'll see it's basically a good way to, it would generate good information, ideas, improvements, and so on. So they started adopting that. Another model that was incorporated under the Scrumban method was the long tail, the effect of the long tail on the business alignment of the system. So classic example of this is your average brick and mortar bookstore, right? It has limited shelf space, and because of the limited shelf space, you only want to sell the most popular products, the products that will sell the most, right? With the rise of Amazon and other things like that, you have infinite amount of shelf space essentially. And because of that, what's happening is it's putting, like the App Store is a classic example. What's being targeted is the niche markets more and more. So how that is affecting product options is changing. And how that's changing what features you work on is changing. How that's changing what features are prioritized is changing. Because niche features, potential value, risk, all these things are coming into and the way you do budgeting is changing. And the way the teams started to understand this market level stuff, the product level stuff, is understanding what are the differentiators, what are the spoilers, cost reducers, cost reduce and table stakes. So these are all market risk things that were starting to get depicted on their Kanban boards, on the stories, on their features. Here's an example. You see the long tail model at the bottom getting. Here's another example, different team by the way, also adopted that. And this team is different by the way. This team is doing a Kanban continuous flow mechanism and using a Kanban continuous flow mechanism. And this one is adopted, this Sri's team has adopted the long tail model without a traditional Kanban continuous flow. So it's still doing traditional sprints, but adopted the long tail model. Another model, this is actually for Kanban, the lowercase Kanban. A Scrumban system is a queuing system. So this lets us apply yet another methodology to gain a better understanding and improve the system. And so we can apply Little Slaw because a Scrumban system is a queuing system. Little Slaw, by the way, there's a paper available. If you guys are interested, you can download it. It's very easy to understand. But I'm not going to go into the details here, but it correlates arrival rate, crossing rate, and the work in progress. So you can apply Little Slaw. There are a couple of conditions that need to be present to be present to be applicable, and those are the conditions actually. And because it can be applied to Scrumban, you can apply it at an iteration level or a release level. One of the conditions that has to be true is in any project's lifetime, you have an initiation phase and you have the middle of the project, and then you have the release phase. Little Slaw applies to the middle portion. Okay. You can use Little Slaw for sprint planning, as I mentioned, if you choose to do iterations. You need to use it with care, which goes beyond the scope of this discussion. But in that formula, WIP, the bar is the average work in progress, average lead time, N is the number of stories, the number of features, and T is the time of the iteration or release. Yes. When planning, make sure you account for dark matter, which is basically traditional term scope creep, right? But this takes on an additional meaning as well, because we believe that work is variable, and so work size changes as you take it on. So just make sure you account for that as well. Account for failure load, which is basically effects and so on. The way we manage uncertainty in Scrumban is through buffer management, and we use different buffers, accommodate different buffers, size buffers, scope buffers, time buffers, skills buffer. Skills buffer is one thing I will mention. That's something that's different than traditional Scrum. From Deming's thinking, basically common cause and special cause variation, or assignable cause variation. And when you talk about skills buffer, think of it this way. All the common work that comes, you want to give it to the ones that are least versatile. And the ones in your team that are most versatile, you want to reserve the special cause variation. Or so that, in other words, you want to give them the most amount of flexibility. What happens traditionally is the ones who are most versatile tend to take on the most common work. So skills buffering is a mechanism to change that. So you want to separate the ones that have, basically the ones that are most versatile, having the most amount of flexibility. Anyway, so that's just skills buffering. Each of these can be a 15-minute topic in itself, so sorry for rushing through things here. Oh, one other point I wanted to make on this was, when using Kanban systems, the role of the project manager shifts from a focus on tasks to managing average lead time, because if width is limited, then throughput depends only on lead time. So that's one thing that is, I think, important to point out, is that in Scrumban, I heard one, when I presented this material to a group before, someone in the audience had mentioned that, you know what, in Kanban systems, the role of a project manager and a scrum master is depleting fast, and there's no need for someone to manage. And I strongly disagree with that, because I think it takes a different focus, it takes a different approach, it takes a much more mathematical approach to management, and a scientific approach to management, and I think there is a definite role for that, and an analytical role for that, that I don't know who else will do if a Scrum Master doesn't do that, or a project manager doesn't do that. And I think that's just my pet peeve of mine to mention anyway. The next one is, I wanted to show you this one, which is, let's take a look at 3 team snapshots at the different evolutions they were at. All these teams were working together effectively, but differently. This one is applying Little's Law with higher confidence, and they were using the WIP limits on the top are not proto-Kanban WIP limits. So typically when people apply WIP limits, they tend to apply WIP limits based on the number of people they have, right? And it's just a poor way of doing it. It's a good start, but that's not what WIP limits are meant to be. So WIP limits can be calculated using Little's Law, and this team is starting to do that. That's a little bit more mature way of doing WIP limits. You also see that they're doing long tail. So again, long tail is a way to generate options. So it's not just one person, the product owner's prerogative in terms of what is being done. It's what is generated, what options that the product owner has, and what options the product owner, the system has, is being informed by mature modeling. Okay. This one, Little's Law, is being used to influence time and expectations. This is a system 2, Bella's team. They were applying Little's Law not to make commitments, but to influence expectations. So how much they can deliver and so on. So Raj's team, system 5, still doing traditional scrums, but one thing that they have done is they've adopted buffer lanes. So to give a sense of readiness in the system. Bella's team, Sam's team this is an interesting system. It's doing 2 different things, which is, one is they've adopted Kinefin framework to characterize remember, the Kinefin framework can be applied both at a system domain standpoint, but can be also applied at a story and feature level as well. So when you have different features and you can categorize those into those 4 domains that we talked about earlier, right? So they were using that to classify the work items, to understand the level of risk in them. But they were also doing something else. They're starting to put Ds and S's here, which is from a market standpoint. So they're looking at work items from both the complexity and from a market standpoint. And they were using that to help make pull decisions within the system. Another model we're going to look at is design thinking. So again, these are different management theories and models and philosophies and principles out there. And again, what Kanban method does is it gives you that capability to plug in different models. And this model is the design thinking. I mean, this one, what I like about design thinking is that it gives that empathetic mindset in designing. So where can you apply this? In board design. I cannot tell you how many boards I've seen that are just cluttered. And who wants to walk to a cluttered board? And how is that encouraging to anyone? It actually discourages people and disengages people when there's lots of information and it's hard to read. So there's design thinking is very important, especially for coaches in the audience and consultants in the audience. And you've seen multiple boards. You go from one system to another system and you see multiple boards. And so you can take ideas and principles and visualization principles and take them to other systems and give them ideas. So board design definitely is an important area where design thinking can be applied. One thing that is worthy of mention in board design is if you have a UX designer on your team, taking their help to design, if it's physical boards, taking their help to design boards. So here are some other areas where design thinking can help. Electronic tools. So in terms of design thinking, make sure it's some characteristics. Make sure it's uncluttered. It's up to date at all times. So if you're using an electronic tool, pick a tool that has live updates, because you really don't want to have to depend on someone's browser refresh to get up-to-date information. Make sure it's universal. By that I mean it's accessible and so on. It's uniform. This particular one, the uniform aspect. So if you have multiple systems within your organization, each one has their own system, board, and they are having similar type of patterns within that system, try to match the same visual design principle in each of those systems. Allowing them to evolve, yes, but try to make that visualization similar. Because especially when there's lots of churn in systems and people go from one system to another system, it's easier for them to engage. Again, this brings up the whole human psychology and the human psychology agenda of Kanban. Make sure it's useful. So lots of tools have that personalized dashboard and balanced scorecard idea. Rally, I know, was working on that. So options theory, another model. I love this Olaf Massen quote: "Never commit early unless you know why." What Olaf is trying to teach is don't constrain yourself before you have to, and don't constrain yourself unless you know why. By using this approach, you can feel good that you made a good effort to make the best decision at that point in time with the information you have available. So the idea is try to make excellent decisions and don't try to reach for the best, because it might come at a cost and a risk that you may not be willing to pay or can pay. Okay? So that's the idea. And a constraint, a time box is a constraint, right? So if you apply that to iteration planning, what he's trying to say is you be in charge of your constraints. If you're committing to a constraint, make sure you know why. Okay, so those are the 5 focusing steps from his thing. But setting the constraints means that you determine what you want to achieve when you've executed the option, most importantly under what conditions. And a time box is a constraint, as I mentioned. Applies to iteration commitment, cost of delay of releasing a product, last responsible moment. Palestine was applying options theory to make pull decisions. So this is a continuous flow Kanban board, and you'll see that they have backlog analysis, development, testing, and so on. And what these people were doing was that, for example, here in the standard class of service, they are 2 done. In the done column of analysis, there's 2. And to pull this, they would try to understand what the constraints are at that point in time. What outcomes they want to affect, and then under what conditions they want those outcomes to be affected. So very local, distributed decision making. An enablement of options theory. So what we looked at is Scrumban, the false hybrids, Kanban and Scrum and Kanban. We said that Scrum is not a process framework or a process destination. We just defined what Scrumban is. Scrumban is a Kanban method applied to Scrum as a starting point or underlying process framework. And Scrumban is the pragmatic and entrepreneurial application to Scrum using scientific management theories. And again, under that management theories, we saw all those models, right? Systems thinking systems, which is A3 thinking, Kinevin framework. We saw the design thinking, we saw options theory. All of those things plugged in under that management theories section. What was the goal? To get business value, service-oriented, agile, lean, adaptive systems. So the third section is this Scrumban measurement section. So Scrumban measurements. When it comes to measurements, Larry Mancheroni from Rally has this new blog post that came out recently in which he describes the Odin framework, which basically is outcomes, decisions, insights, and measurements. So the idea is start with the why, understand what decisions you what decisions you need to make, then what insights you would need for those decisions, and then come to what measurements you need for that insights, right? Measurements is probably management's favorite topic because I love Goodhart's law. Goodhart said, he's an economist, any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed upon it for control purposes. So if you start measuring things, things will start changing. So measurement types, qualification versus quantification, simple. Quality of judgment that something meets a certain criteria. Quantity, to apply a certain measurement to something, not just a count. Nominal versus ordinal, whether a thing is in a set or not. And ordinal is how much of it. Deterministic versus probabilistic. And I'm drawing these distinctions because, especially in Scrumban, we tend to do much more of a probabilistic measurement when we give predictions as to when a certain thing is going to be delivered. And so it's useful to have that background. And in terms of the number of measurements that we tend to do, here are just a few of them. And that's just a small number. The most popular ones are right in the middle there, the cumulative flow diagram, or the CFD, and the other one is the lead time histogram. CFD, we'll look at both of those examples. Lead time histogram, this one gives you a historical, will give you a historical understanding of how long different work items have taken to get things done. And time is something everyone understands. They're not proxy measures, not points, and it allows for scale and forecasting. CFD, this gives you a sort of a snapshot of what's going on within your system. Another one is flow efficiency. So it indicates how much room there is for improvement. This is for mostly flow stuff. So you want to make sure things are flowing within your system. This is a good measure to look at. Another one is SLA performance. So the whole idea in Kanban, one of the principles is to make policies explicit, and class of service you can measure against how you're doing against a particular class of service. Due date performance. This is another one, visualization for a fixed date class of service to visualize how you're doing against that. Coming back to the bank, Scrumban was really like one of the things that just kind of took off. In terms of measurements, they really picked what was really specific to them. So they went away from burn up, burn down charts, stacked charts, to release burn down charts, to much more of a CFD lead time histogram. That was one of the changes that they made. And Scrumban really was just from managing their workflow to improving their delivery, owning practices. It was really a pretty popular change method. And last thing, from a business standpoint, this was their result. It ultimately delivered the second and final release just 5 weeks past its original due date. And that was viewed as a major achievement in that context. Most important things cannot be measured. I flew through a whole lot of really intense topics. So lots of different models, lots of different stuff, lots of different ideas that teams have implemented and got value and benefit out of it. What I did not cover is a lot of management stuff, a lot of maturing stuff, modeling, including Monte Carlo simulations, risk calibration, and things like that. So I wanted to introduce Jack Speranza, who is our program manager, just briefly, if you will, to just talk through some of the things that we do at ProGenesis.
Hi, everyone. I promise this isn't a sales pitch. You just experienced being Ajayized, as I like to call it. I've been working with a gentleman for the last several months, helping him to write that book that he's talking about. And there's a lot of complexity behind Scrumban, and it's really incredible in terms of the flexibility that it brings to the table, and the additional dimensions that it can bring to Scrum teams or any other team, and any other methodology. So, as he said, he's only touched upon, a very surface level of what's involved. And what we do as a company, and what he does as the founder of our company, as the leader of our company, is we do training workshops, we do coaching, and so that's, if you want to learn more about any of these fundamentals and how these things can get brought into your organization, there are some flyers in the back that allow you to contact us about that. He's also, I think, Ajay, how do I?
Space.
So Scrumban Do is a tool. He's also co-founder of Scrum Do, and that's implementing a lot of these features into the evolutionary process for Scrum teams. But more importantly, really, I thought it was up here, Ajay, I'm sorry. There is his personal blog at Scrumban.io, where we have members from the entire community, hopefully beginning to contribute to a better understanding of Scrumban and how to apply it in different environments and how it can be meaningful to you. So we invite you to participate in those arenas so that you can learn more. And that's really all I have to say, so thank you. So are there any questions for Ajay?
I didn't really understand the long tail analysis, design, whatever it is. Can you elaborate that, preferably with an explicit example of exactly what one would do?
Yeah, sure. So a good example is, so the App Store, right? There's 1 billion apps in the App Store. And when let me just show you the example. So what this is showing here in this graph is that products versus popularity, right? There are only a few products that are very, very popular, but these products that are very, very popular have very little profit margins because of the competition in terms of how many people sell these products. Okay? So far, so good? Yeah. When you go on the long tail, because these are niche markets, the profit on this can be higher because there's not many producers of this. This is really from Chris Anderson's book, not David Anderson, but Chris Anderson. And on this, you have bigger profit margins. Okay? So, and how this works its way backwards is that traditionally, product owners and people who did market research used to focus on development when you're releasing stuff on things that would be much more used and consumed rather than on the long tail. The App Store is a good example of what's happening in the market is that people are targeting this long tail because of the profit margin. And hence you have 1 billion apps in the App Store. Sure.
To clarify a bit, when the development,
Yeah.
to clarify, so when the development team is deciding what to do, what to pull in from the backlog,
Right.
it's looking at the aggregate profit that it would make from particular
Right,
things?
exactly. So those market aspects are making its way onto the board.
So it's a
And the
business
prioritization.
decision, really?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. One quick procedural question and then the other question. Procedural question, where can we get a copy of your slides?
I will upload it to that Facebook page.
They'll be on the website too.
Okay.
Okay. The other is, well, I could ask a longer question, but this is complex, complicated, chaotic, simple, more ways of attacking them, and I'll focus the question on one of them. You say for complex systems you do probe. Can you explain that further?
Yes. So in complex systems, you don't know if there is a cause, or if there is, you don't know the problem and you don't know the solution to the problem. So you don't know the problem or the cause. So what you're doing is you're probing the system. You're designing experiments to probe the system to understand what the system is, what the domain is, or what the problem is. You're trying to understand what's going on. So that's essentially how you deal with a complex domain to not go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And is it an organized probe or you just put it random?
Yeah, so in this particular case, they came to design experiments that they thought would give them the best information about their complex domain.
Hi, so the stuff I read on Kanban mostly says that it's focused, it's better for teams with more of an inconsistent workflow, like a production support team. Can you just comment on the profile for a team where Scrumban would be a good fit?
Okay, can you repeat the latter part of your?
So I've seen Kanban applied on operational teams that are doing like support.
Yeah.
But in Scrumban seems like your definition was a little more encompassing, that you could apply it across other more project-based teams.
Absolutely.
So could you just give a little bit of maybe like a little more of a profile, or it should be a more mature team? What type of team composition, the profile of the team?
Yeah. In terms of how much of maturity of understanding, you don't need, a team doesn't need to understand all these concepts to do Scrumban. If you can do Scrumban with as simple as just, anyone who can do Scrum can do Scrumban. As simple, at a very, very basic level. Now, if someone wants to bring in a risk profile or things like that, then you'll need to understand a little bit more in depth and a little bit more mature. You need to have a deeper understanding of that when you bring in those concepts.
Thanks, Ajay. So the thinking models that you talked about are great by themselves, right?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about how or what you see as Scrumban bringing to them, or how do they interact so that you sort of get an additional leap in performance versus just Scrum by itself or just the thinking tools by themselves?
Sure. So in terms of just, Scrumban is a process framework, right? So I'm sorry, Scrum is a process framework. When you apply Kanban to Scrum, you're getting Scrumban. So when you're applying, to answer your question about how, in the context of A3 thinking, their particular way, they added that capability to that system, so now they have a disciplined problem-solving method within that system. Now, that in itself is not adding to the process framework, but as a system, they've improved their capability. So I'm not a fan of differentiating the process of a system from the system itself, right? So that's just the way.
And under Scrumban, with Scrum, you seem very, kind of ceremonial planning sessions, right? Is there any differentiation under a Scrumban? Is it more dedicated to the product? Is the product owner spend most of the time prioritizing, or is it more still group planning?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the maturity of the team. I'm not a huge fan of product owner as a sole authority on, complete priority. Like, I don't like that model in general, but in Scrumban teams, in this particular case, they had a collaborative, they had a shared understanding of what the risk was, what the market. So when something was higher priority, it was determined as higher priority by everyone. Like it was just obvious because of the things that were discussed was just what it was visible, transparent to them, what the market issues were, what the business issues were. John?
I've heard one explanation or discussion of Scrumban is saying that the biggest difference between Scrumban and Scrum is you don't actually have a fixed iteration plan. It's more a matter of just using pull till the time of the iteration is nearly up. Would you say that's the major difference, or what would you characterize as the biggest difference between Scrum and Scrumban?
I'm saying that if they can do either. They can do Scrumban with iterations, or they can do Scrumban without iterations. But that's not what Scrumban is. And I think it's a false definition when they say, are you doing Scrumban? Are you doing Scrumban meaning Scrum within Kanban or Kanban within Scrum? And that just it's a false bifurcation. False dichotomy.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jake. Really appreciate it.